little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. United Bethlehem, they won 2 seats. Bethlehem of Tomorrow won 2 seats. Developing Bethlehem for All, 1 seat. Bethlehem is our city, 2 seats. Bethlehem the Future, 3 seats. And we are all Bethlehem, 5 seats. So again, where's the National Liberation and Constructiveness? I don't see them at all. I don't see where Fatah is in this list on Bethlehem. So Hebron, National Liberation and Constructiveness, 7 seats. National Consensus, 4 seats. Independent Future, 3 seats. And Hebron for All, 1 seat. So even there's 7 seats, so they do have a kind of mandate. You have 8 seats who were opposed to the list of 7.3 million reasons why the West Bank elections suck. So May 13th, 2017, the West Bank had the elections. They're called the Palestinian elections, but Gaza isn't even a part of it, all those refugees. So let's add up some of these numbers. So 420,682 were the Palestinians that voted. So 420,000, maybe 421,000 if you want to make it simpler. So that's out of 787,386 total registered voters. So 421,000 out of 787,000 voters, that's a little bit above 50%. I think it's 53, 54%. So they're saying, oh, it's a democracy. 53, 54% had actually voted. Well, if you add all the Palestinians, start out with the 7,000 Palestinians that are stuck in Israeli prisons. 7,000 Palestinians are stuck in 1,000 Palestinians stuck in Israeli prisons. Many of them women and children, and none of the adults got to vote. 150,000 Palestinians live in East Jerusalem, which was annexed in 1967. They didn't get to vote. That's 150,000 plus 7,000. There are 600 dead Palestinians in the Fatah-Hamas Civil War, which I will put on Fatah because Abbas shouldn't even have been in there. He was term limited, plus he lost the election 8 years after the end of his term, which ended in 2009. He's still in power. So 600 dead Palestinians from the Civil War. 1.8 million Palestinians in Gaza didn't get to vote. And then there's 5 million Palestinian refugees that are registered in the UN camps. They didn't get to vote either. So 5 million Palestinians in the UN camps didn't get to vote. 1.8 million Palestinians in Gaza didn't get to vote. 150. When you add all that up, what you get is 7,324,304 Palestinians who did not vote, who were disenfranchised by the West Bank elections. That's 95%. 95% of the Palestinians, including 5 million. 5 million Palestinians didn't even get to vote in the West Bank. So, you might say, well, the Fatah-Hamas schism, goes ahead and disenfranchises the 1.8 million in Gaza. What about East Jerusalem? 150,000 Palestinians didn't get to vote, plus the 7,000 Palestinians stuck in the jails, plus all those dissidents that had been politically assassinated, including the 600 who were killed in the Fatah-Hamas Civil War. So the 420,000 that they brag about being the majority, that only represents 5%. 5%. It's not a democracy. Now, Kentucky elects their governors with only 11% of the vote, so I can't complain too much. So Palestine, at least the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, had their elections yesterday. The results just came out today. But first I want to mention that Hamas in Gaza, since Gaza is controlled by Hamas, ever since the Fatah-Hamas Civil War 2006-2007, which we saw Hamas just sweep the parliamentary elections. So the parliamentary elections, the 74 of 100-something seats were Hamas. So therefore Hamas should have been controlling the West Bank and Gaza, but Fatah just couldn't let that happen, so they fought them. And ultimately what happened is Hamas is in control of Gaza, and Fatah is in control of the West Bank, and the West Bank is what just had an election today. So there is a change in leadership in Hamas too, and he was, he was promoted to be the president, or he was a prime minister. He's the prime minister of the Palestinian National Authority because he was the Hamas chosen leader, but instead he went to the Gaza Strip. So that's where Ismail Haniyeh. So Ismail Haniyeh, this man here with the white beard, he's got a white beard and he's got the white, hair on the side. He is the Prime Minister of the Palestinian National Authority. So recently, May 6, 2017, he was elected as the Hamas political chief. So these were elections behind closed doors. These were the Hamas elites. But Khalid Mishal was the head leader of Hamas. Now Ismail Haniyeh is the supreme leader, the dictator. He's the man in God. Also, student elections at the Birzeit University in West Bank for the third year in a row. And I guess this is a poll or a mock election, but the Islamic Wafa bloc won 25 out of 51 seats, while the Fatah-affiliated Yasser Arafat bloc bagged 22 seats. And then the Democratic Progressive Student poll got 4 seats. So that means Hamas won. Hamas won, and then 7,824 out of the 10,800 eligible voters, eligible students voted in the election. So that's, 70-something%. So that's a good poll. That's a good, I don't know what the power they actually get there, but they were saying because of this election, if Hamas was in the West Bank elections, Hamas would win. Hamas would have won, and that would show that the resistance, they want Palestine. You have about 7,000 Palestinians are stuck in the Israeli prisons, and 1,000 of those Palestinians are engaged in a hunger strike, and they've been engaged in a hunger strike since April 17th. So for nearly a month, there have been 1,000 Palestinians in Israeli jails doing a hunger strike because they want to get the world's attention, right? They want the outrage. And Hamas, Haniyeh, that man I just pointed out, right, Ismail Haniyeh, he said his first appearance as Hamas leader, he pledged his support for the hunger striking Palestinian prisoners in the very first comment while he visited a protest tent in support of the strikers. And they're hoping that because he's been chosen, he's in, Israel, they don't want Israel to assassinate him. So Ismail Haniyeh was appointed prime minister after the Hamas movement won the 2006-2007 parliamentary elections, right, beating Fatah. But somehow Fatah was able to use military might. So that does put a stink. It puts an illegitimate stink on the entire elections. Ultimately, though, it's been 11 years, and so I think that this issue has been settled, right? Fatah controls the West Bank, Hamas controls Gaza. And if you want change, you're going to have to do it through the electoral, ballots, because violence, Fatah will hold on to their power with violence. And there was low turnout rates all throughout the country. Abbas is one of the most hated politicians in the West Bank. That's why he's never there. That's why he's always around the world, pretending to be the leader when there really isn't much of a leadership going on. He takes pride in, throwing young political dissidents in jail as if they were. The Palestinian Authority actually had requested to Israel to stop deducting the cost of electricity provided to Gaza, $11 million a month from the monthly PA customs and tax revenues. So this is the West Bank, the government of the West Bank. This is Fatah cutting off the electricity of the people of Gaza, $11 million. And, I guess it's not their electricity to pay for the people, but it just, people need electricity. So that's going to be a problem that the Hamas leadership is going to have to deal with. Donald Trump, he's vowed to revive the stalled Israel-Palestine peace process by acting as a mediator, an arbitrator, or a facilitator. His people got in trouble recently for saying something about Palestine. He's going to go visit Palestine. You were supposed to call it the Palestine territories. And, just reverse the roles. Do it to Israel. No, it's not Israel. It's the Israel territories. Why? Because it's attempted to soften their hard-line stance. So instead of saying, Israel is going to be wiped off the face of the planet, what they're saying now is they want East Jerusalem. They want to be able to vote in East Jerusalem. So there's another stink on the election, right? East Jerusalem wasn't allowed to vote. Gaza wasn't allowed to vote. And Hamas wasn't entered into any of the elections. And then the occupation. The occupation puts a whole stink on the whole thing, right? You're being occupied by a different group, and that's the Palestinian Authority has to ask Israel to shut off the electricity? Why can't the Palestinian, what control, if the Palestinian Authority doesn't even control their own electricity, what do they control? Do they control the food, the water? I heard Israel counts the food down to the calorie to make sure that there's a blockade that's going on, so very little food, only what food and water that Israel permits the Palestinians to have is all that they get. So there's some people that say that Fatah took some seats, took a few seats, so it's kind of hard to tell who's affiliated and who actually is, because Fatah themselves won 0 seats. Fatah didn't win any of the seats, but they did say here in an Israel newspaper that Fatah led in Jenin and Jericho. So Fatah won in Jericho, okay? So here in Jenin, I see that the National Liberation and Constructiveness Party won 8 seats. And then I see Jezreel Valley won 5 seats, and then Jenin is my hometown. That's a political party in Palestine. Jenin is my hometown, and it won 2 seats. So which one of those is Fatah? National Liberation and Constructiveness, Jezreel Valley, Jenin is my hometown. You'd really have to know who the people are and who they're associated with to see if they're Fatah or not. But I see 3 different political parties. Tulkarim, you had 7 seats that were won by the National Liberation and Constructiveness. So again, National Liberation and Constructiveness seems to be the top vote getters in some of these towns. And we are all Tulkarim. We are all Tulkarim, Tulkarim. They won 4 seats. The National Front, 2 seats. Construction and Development, 1 seat. Justice, 1 seat. Martyrs of Tubus, 6 seats. Tubus for All, 3 seats. Faith, 2 seats. Future, 2 seats. Tubus the Dignity, 2 seats. Tubus the Dignity, Future, Faith. Listen to these political parties. Martyrs of Tubus. It's pretty hard to vote against the Martyrs of Tubus, right? So the Martyrs of the Revolution. Justice, and we're Nablus. Nablus United, 11 seats. Independent Youth, 2 seats. Nablus Brings Us Together, 2 seats. So that's how the 15 seats in Nablus were broken down. 11 of them went to Nablus United, 2 seats went to Independent Youth, and 2 seats went to Nablus Brings Us Together. Now we have Qualquilia. And Qualquilia for All won 8 seats, and the Independent Bloc won 7 seats. Now you have Saul Fit for All won 6 seats. Al-Aqsa Bloc won 5 seats. Martyrs of the South Fit Bloc won 3 seats, and South Fit United won 1 seat. Children of the Country won 8 seats in Ramallah. Ramallah Brings Us Together won 5 seats. The Democratic Alliance won 2 seats. These are all the Ramallah. Bure Al-Watan Professional List. The Al-Watan Professional List won 5 seats. The Voice of Al-Bari, 5 seats. The Nonpartisans, 3 seats. Al-Bari Al-Mustaqbal, The Future. Al-Bari The Future, 1 seat. Al-Bari The Bright, 1 seat. Now Jericho, National Liberation and Constructiveness, they won 10 seats, and Unity and Change won 5 seats. So I'm going to assume that National Liberation and Constructiveness would be your Fatah party, okay? Those are the ones who are obviously Fatah, and so that means, I'm going to go back through this, but a lot of these cities didn't have any National Liberation and Constructiveness parties. So that's, if you're not clearly a partisan, I'm not for sure if you really are. Bethlehem, we are all Bethlehem, 5 seats. Bethlehem, the Future Bloc, 3 seats. Bethlehem is our city, 2 seats. Fatah's list was notably ahead in the cities of Jenin, Jericho, and Hebron. Now, I heard that there was gunshots in Hebron. In the Israeli side, they said they heard gunshots in the city that was adjoining them, that was adjacent to Hebron. In Kiryat Arba. So Kiryat Arba, they heard, gunshots. So Fatah were leading in Jenin and Jericho and Hebron. What about all those other cities, right? In Tulkarim, there was Tulkarim too. They won 7 seats versus 7, versus 8. So they, they're the largest. They won a plurality, but not a majority in Tulkarim and in Jenin and Jericho and in Hebron. But in Tubas, they didn't win a single seat. In Nablus, they didn't win a single seat. In Quiquila, not a single seat. Salfit, Fatah didn't win a single seat. In Ramallah, not a single seat. In Albera or Buri, there were 0 seats. In Bethlehem, 0 seats. National Liberation and Constructiveness didn't even place. In Bethlehem, Alberi, Salfit, Quiquila, Nablus, Tubas, only in Karim and Jenin and Jericho and Hebron did they win significant seats. So that means 1 city, 2 cities, 3 cities, 4 cities, 5 cities, 6 cities, 7 cities, 7 cities, Fatah lost. Fatah lost hands down. And even in the ones that they won, they only won a plurality, but not a majority, except for Jenin. Okay, so Jenin is still Fatah controlled, but that's it. That's it. In Jericho, it was split. In Jericho, well, 10-5. Okay, so Jericho and Jenin is Fatah. Tulkarem is 7 seats, but they didn't win a majority. So they didn't take Tulkarem. They only take Jenin and Jericho, and then Hebron, Jericho and Jenin, out of, a dozen or so cities. So Fatah, this is a blow, serious blow to Fatah. More than half of the 536 lists participating in the elections were not registered as being affiliated with any party. So instead of Hamas or any other political opposition party, it was just a bunch of independents, which is actually brilliant if you think about it. Turnout was far lower in large cities in the surrounding communities, with the lowest in Nablus, the main city in northern West Bank. Turnout rate was 21%. Official figures showed that turnout was 53.4%, which I actually heard that it was lower than 50%. I had a turnout of less than 40%. So America has a ton of elections where only 13-20% vote, but we go ahead and just say, fuck it, who cares? All right, at least there was an election. Somebody got voted in. So Ramallah had, turnout less than 40%, and Nablus had, less than 21%. You had Hamas and the Communist and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, all these political parties who protested or boycotted the election. There's the schism between West Bank Fatah Party and, the Gaza, Hamas-controlled Gaza. This election was a Fatah election, Fatah-controlled, Fatah-dominated. This was in a Fatah-occupied region. And the Palestinian Authority is in occupation, just like Israel's in occupation. Well, we're here now, so fuck you. That's the Palestinian. The participation rate in these elections, in the Palestinian elections, in the West Bank elections, let's be specific. It wasn't the Palestinians, it was just the West Bank Palestinians that got the vote. And Fatah controlled this thing from top to bottom. And they still lost substantially. Okay, but the participation rate was virtually the same as in the 2012 and 2005 local elections. I don't know, those are the West Bank elections too. And they said, political analyst Talal Akel told Man that at the time, the low turnout rate is the sign of Palestinians' frustration with the political parties and the Palestinian Authority. And there's a lot to be frustrated with them. Okay, so let's get some details here. The Central Election Committee said that voting hours were extended for the Samaritans, for the Good Samaritans who observe the Sabbath on Saturdays. They had an extended period of time to vote. And in Hebron, you had Tassir Abu Shanine. He is going to head the biggest West Bank city, Hebron. So Hebron has a leader now, Tassir Abu Shanine, and he seems like to be of the Fatah cloth, okay? And interesting enough about him, he was convicted of murdering 6 Israelis in a 1980 terror attack. And he was put in prison for the rest of his life in Israel, but due to a prisoner exchange, he was able to get out, and now he's the mayor of Hebron. So even the Fatah-controlled ones, because I heard in Israel papers, they were like, oh my God, only in Palestine can you murder Israelis and be, how many Palestinians have Netanyahu killed? Isn't that a prerequisite for Israel to vote for those who, if they hadn't killed Palestinians, that they're willing to kill Palestinians? So this is Fatah, though. This is Fatah. And their names, even though Hamas wasn't in the election, a lot of the names for the local councils was just put in as, the home of Bethlehem. We're all Bethlehem. So those were assumed to be more on the side of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. That's the sort of, I guess, operational opposition party in the West Bank. Now, the way that it breaks down, the party list, because this is a parliamentary election, which I'll explain here in a second, but the list that were not officially tied to any political parties, the independent list, they won 65%, but the list that had official political party list obtained 35%. So 65% for change, 35% to keep things the same. That's a loss. Fatah got their asses kicked, and good. Fuck Fatah. Fatah in 2009, the president, Mahmoud Abbas, they said that his term actually expired in 2009. No, his term expired in 2006 when he was voted out. So, but even in his own terms, in his own guidelines, he's still in power 8 years later. So how does Fatah, how do they establish any type of legitimacy whatsoever? So that's a problem. Fatah's a problem. Fatah just seems like it's totally illegitimate. It's been illegitimate for 11 years. It's very similar to Israel, right? They just set up shop and they just said, oh, we're here now. What the fuck are you going to do about it? We're here now. We're having elections. You're going to have to get over it because, the power that we've been able to consolidate, this is what we're voting for. So they did lose, though. So 65% is going to be an independent thing. Fatah has lost control. Fatah has lost control of the West Bank. It's going to be somebody else. It's going to be something different. So that's good. That's exciting. And the local elections were scheduled to be October 16th. 16th is when the West Bank was going to have elections, but then there was a backlash over a Palestinian Authority Supreme Court ruling that excluded the Gaza Strip from the elections altogether, but they weren't a part of the election. Even though they weren't a part of the election, the Fatah-controlled Fatah elections by the Fatah president who was supposed to have stepped down 8 years ago, who killed, over 600 Palestinians in the Fatah-Hamas Civil War, 2006-2007, when Fatah refused to recognize that Hamas was the legitimate democratic leader. What was I saying? So Fatah controls the West Bank. Hamas controls the Gaza Strip. There was a lot of elections. A lot of people actually voted in this. So there was 4,411 candidates who vied for 1,561 seats in the local Palestinian elections, and there are 1,400 local and international observers. It seems like these West Bank elections were fair considering, the historical context, considering the occupation, considering, Fatah controlling everything but with an iron fist, a totalitarian fascist society, and they held on for 8 years without any democratic legitimacy. So this totally does change the conversation. So it was a fair election considering, right, considering the Israeli occupation, considering the Palestinian Authority's cooperation with Israel, considering that East Jerusalem, according to the 1967 borders, East Jerusalem would have been part of Palestine, so therefore they would have got the vote too. They weren't a part of the voting process. Then you got 1,000 Palestinians. Actually, you got 7,000 Palestinians in Israeli prisons who didn't get the vote. 1,000 of them are engaged in hunger strikes right now, which is what Hamas is pointing out. Look at what you're doing. Right now, these prisoners can't even. 7,000 Palestinians in Israeli prisons could not vote. The Palestinians in East Jerusalem could not vote. The Palestinians in Gaza could not vote. We're not allowed to vote. We're not a part of the election process whatsoever. And then you have, it said that there was an electoral list that won automatically in 181 municipalities. So in, districts, in 181 different districts, they ran unopposed. So we have that going on here in America. So very American to have unopposed elections. Colorado has judges. Judges don't run unopposed. In fact, we just say, do we want to retain them or not? And they surprisingly get retained. So 65 localities have no nominated electoral list at all. So that means another election needs to be scheduled because no list was even submitted for 65 of the local councils. Not even the biggest voting bloc, okay? They're going to say that 50%, around 50% of the Palestinians in West Bank had voted in this. So out of 800,000, about 400,000 of the West Bankers had voted. And but 5 million Palestinians are listed as refugees by the United Nations who are not permitted to vote in local elections. They're supposedly going to be allowed to vote in national elections, but 5 million Palestinians. 5 million Palestinians were disenfranchised, along with East Jerusalem, along with all the people of Gaza, along with the 7,000 Palestinians in the Israeli prisons, along with the 65 localities that didn't nominate anybody at all, the 181 municipalities that ran unopposed. Oh, okay, well, you have a list, and they don't, so I guess your list wins. This is not democracy. Now, America has a lot of problems themselves, so don't get me wrong. The biggest takeaway that I see from these elections, 5 million Palestinians, if they were registered with the UN agency, the UNRWA, who are responsible for providing services for 5 million Palestinian refugees who are residing in refugee camps all across the West Bank, they're barred from voting in the elections. They live in the West Bank. There's 5 million of them. 400,000 is going to be the Democratic, legitimacy. They're going to go on and say, well, I won the thing, right? You got that Tassir, oh, I'm the mayor or whatever. Yeah, well, 5 million Palestinians did not vote. None of the 7,000 in the prisons voted. In fact, compared to 5 million, those other numbers don't even matter, right? 5 million. That means the biggest block of Palestinian voters did not vote. 800,000 is the registered voters, but you got 5 million off to the side. I guess they're not registered, so you don't even count them as a dispute that had erupted following the preliminary announcement of results in Ramallah area village of Deir Abu Mashal, and it led to 5 Palestinians being injured. Now, the CEC chairman, Hannah Nasser, she said Hannah, I think it's she, voter turnout stood at 53.4%, so the majority of the registered voters, 420,000 voted. 420,682 of the 787,386 eligible voters headed to the polls in 145 municipalities. So out of the 145 regions, are they trying to tell me out of the 145 regions, there's a whole, this is so complicated. It says 65 localities did not have electoral lists at all. 181 localities ran unopposed, and then it's saying here that you had 145 regions were voting. Fatah does control Hebron, okay? And so the gunshots, I don't understand I guess maybe just everybody gets, that's how they celebrate. It doesn't matter which side wins. Tassir Abu Sinai was actually selected by Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah to head the party list in Hebron for Saturday's West Bank elections. So when the the construction party won, even though it was 7 of the 15 seats, they're saying, well, we got a mandate. We got a mandate by having the majority of the voters, and it's very possible that the other 8 could have formed an alliance, but they didn't. Okay, so Jericho and Jenin and another city and Hebron fell to Fatah. Fatah won 35%. The independents won 65%. So a huge win for the independent parties. Huge win for Abu Sinai, was one of 4 Palestinians who on May the 2nd, 1980 attacked a group of Israelis in a Hebron alley, firing and hurling grenades at them. The attack killed U.S. citizens Tzivi Glatt and Eli Hazazev, Canadian Shmuel Marmolstein, Israelis Hanan Krauthammer, Gershon Klein, and Yaakov Zimmerman. Another 20 people were injured in the attack. The 4 Palestinians were all sentenced to life in prison, but they were released in a prisoner exchange. So that's the mayor of Hebron. That's part of the Fatah, the conservative, moderate Fatah. That's just something he did in his past. I don't know his views today. He very much could be, conciliatory and want to work with Israel today. But that's his past, okay? So that's the mayor of Hebron, the largest city in the West Bank. Tassir Abu. It's important that now, just to know that there's 6,500 to 7,000 Palestinians, many of them children, many of them women and children, who are being held in Israeli prisons today at 24 detention centers across Israel. 1,000 of those prisoners are having a hunger strike, which they've maintained since April 17th. April 17th, it's May 14th now, for nearly a month. For nearly a month, 1,000 Palestinian prisoners have not ate whatsoever. hoping to put the pressure on, to shame the people, to make them act right. So this is all happening under the guise of the occupation, under the guise of these political prisoners who are starving themselves, hoping to get, some leeway. I'm not for sure what they're, I guess, freedom, right? And the political authority itself is in occupation. They're going after student dissidents. So just like Israel's in occupation. Up out of nowhere, you're just going to come in and set up shop, just up out of nowhere, right? Israel just comes in and sets up shop just out of nowhere. The Palestinian Authority comes up and set up shop. Hamas is a legitimate winner since the 2016 parliamentary election. And so, Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, who's supposed to step down 8 years ago, he's this is my territory now, and that's that. No, that's bullshit. It's not that's that, okay? So if you compare the 2006 parliamentary elections, there was a 78% turnout rate. People wanted to go to the polls. They were excited about it, voting for democracy. And so parliamentary elections, a quick note on parliamentary elections, they're different than the American winner-take-all elections. So they're, percentage-wise, you vote on the party list. So which political party do you want? And then whoever gets the majority, then their whole list gets into office, and you could vote for a bunch. It encourages more political parties. Look at how many political parties you have. The what's the advantages of a winner-take-all versus parliamentary election? Winner-take-all, I think winner-take-all actually encourages extremism, but extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. So, I don't know. I think that the parliamentary elections definitely force you to be more moderate. Parliamentary elections definitely force you to build coalitions. So that's what some people would say would be a benefit. There's more consensus building, more coalition building. So since there's no clear majority, now all these, opposition groups have to get together and figure out who's going to be the majority bloc and who's going to rule over, everybody else. So it forces them to make these coalitions. And you vote on the party, you vote on the party list, you got all those political parties, so, it encourages independents to get out there. In order to have a functioning government, a coalition needs to be created. Whereas in America, the one person gets all the power, and then the other person gets dick. Hamas did say they wanted the people to go vote. They said they were not allowed to vote, but there were some officials in the Hamas organization, the movement, the Islamic movement, that said go vote. It's important to at least get your voice heard. So even though, it's not the 2006 elections where 78% came out, if you add the 5 million people, then you don't have democratic authority whatsoever. That would take it down from 50% to, about 10%? So 10%, I don't know. Kentucky's voted governors based on 12% of the vote. So even if you were to add the 5 million refugees who didn't get a vote, it's still going to be considered legitimate. And I think that's a damn shame. It's a damn shame because they are, Hamas is the legitimate winners. Hamas is. Read my objections one more time. So it's, fair elections considering Abbas was supposed to have stepped down 8 years ago, so Fatah shouldn't have had any control for the last 8 years. It should have been Hamas that's in there. In spite of all of Gazans, no Gazans being allowed to vote, in spite of the 5 million Palestinians in the UN refugee camps not allowed to vote, in spite of the 7,000 Palestinians in the Israeli prisons not allowed to vote, in spite of Eastern Jerusalem Palestinians who weren't allowed to vote. The, 420,000 people, there is some semblance of a democracy there, all in spite of the 65 localities who had no nominated electoral list at all, so they'll either have to redo it or just keep protesting democracy. And then the 181 municipalities who had nobody, they were running unopposed. So what's the choice here? The choice between Tweedledee, Central Election Commission, Hannah Nasser, said 1.3% of voters cast white ballots and 2.75% of the votes were null. So I don't know what the white ballots mean, but 2.75% of the votes were null. So they voted incorrectly. They didn't know what they were doing. So even if you were to take their, 400,000, you automatically skim off 3%. You skim off the Eastern Jerusalem Palestinians, the 7,000 Palestinians that are in the Israeli prisons. I don't know the number of people that are in Gaza, but 1 or 2 more million there. And then, of course, the 5 million refugees that are in the United Nations, UNRWA. So I'm not sure what RWA means. Will not vote, I think. That's what it seems to represent to me. So, what a mess, huh?